In Tanzania, women are waiting to see a healthcare worker at an AIDS clinic. The women are terrified of being recognized and fearful that their husbands will discover that they have AIDS. If that happens, the women fear their husbands will beat them and worse, abandon them and their children. In all likelihood, their husbands are the ones responsible for infecting them with HIV. In a small, dirt-floored room in a Delhi slum, Nausea, a young Indian woman, is trembling with fear. She's telling a women's support group how her husband tried to kill her, twice. He was attempting to blackmail her family because the dowry he received from them, a motorcycle, wasn't sufficient. What he wanted and was demanding was a full-sized car. My name is Dashni Jayathure, and I'm an ongoing development program manager in GTech Consumers, and I'm thrilled to be introducing our speaker today, Mark Tuschman. What I just read to you were two brief excerpts from a proposal for Mark's book, Faces of Courage: Intimate Portraits of Women on the Edge. A veteran freelance photographer, Mark has traveled to parts of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, documenting the struggle of millions of girls and women to have agency over their bodies and lives. Through his photography, Mark also chronicles the relentless doctors, midwives, teachers, and counselors who strive to bring hope and independence to women. Mark has devoted much of the past decade to collaborating with socially conscious corporations, UN agencies, foundations, and NGOs to document global health and women's human rights issues. Nonetheless, and I think this is important to say, this is not a book about women as victims. Jill Sheffield of Women Deliver writes in the introduction to Faces of Courage. Mark has combined sadness with hope, problem with solution, and tears with smiles. We cannot just look at the problem. We have to inject hope and possibility into this reality. We're thrilled to have Mark here today. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm very thrilled to be here. And I really published Faces of Courage to really help improve the lives of women and girls and to get people to help. Invariably, I get asked what motivated me to undertake this decade-long project. And I earned my living as a commercial photographer, and that satisfied my wallet, but it never satisfied my sense that photography should be used to raise consciousness and promote social justice. I grew up on the Lower East Side in New York, and for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I lived in a tenement house with my grandparents and my parents. And I don't know if you know the history of the Lower East Side, but the turn of the last century, it probably was the most congested place on earth, and it was filled with great amounts of poverty. So I think I just became very sensitized to the issues of poverty and people's struggles to improve their lives. And in the late 90s, I was reading a lot of Nicholas Kristof's columns, and I became very aware of the plight of women and girls and the struggles they had every day just to survive. And in 2001, I decided to do something about it and take some action. So I had a friend who was on the board of directors of the Global Fund for Women, and she arranged that I go to Asia, in particular China, Mongolia, impacted by the images. I want the viewer to see these women as individuals, not just another statistics, that their life matters, they all have dignity, and each and every one of them is doing the very, very best that they can. And this image was taken in Ethiopia, and this is how the women's sole possessions is in this room. This was in northern Kenya. This was a woman who was part of a survivor of the genocidal violence that occurred in, I think, 2008. Now, having these series of portraits allows me to segue into a very, very important topic, and that's the whole issue of maternal health care. In fact, every time a woman or a young girl gets pregnant in a developing country, she's risking her life. And I've come across many scenes like this. This one is in northern Nigeria, where all these women are waiting to see not a doctor or a nurse, but a healthcare worker. And they've had to overcome many, many obstacles to just even get to this clinic. There are financial obstacles, there's lack of facilities, there's cultural and religious obstacles, many, many obstacles. And this was another scene in northern Nigeria, and all these women are just sitting in this dirt floor waiting to see a traditional birth attendant. And this is their total sum of their medical facilities is in this little room. And now without contraception or medical care, teenagers get pregnant at a very, very early age, unfortunately, and basically confining them to an endless cycle of poverty with very, very little choices in their life. And this young woman is from Ethiopia, and she's 17 years old, and that's the second child that she has on her back. This photograph was taken in Bangladesh, and it was in a ward with a lot of teenage mothers. And here you can see the mother's in the background. She's completely detached from her child, and this was very, very common. It's the nurse who's taking care of her baby. This was taken last year in Meru, Kenya. That's Frida on your right, and she's 16 years old. It's her first baby. She's a baby out of wedlock. Now, one of the consequences of teenage pregnancy is that without reproductive health care, many teenagers are too immature to really have a baby, and they'll have an obstructed labor, and they'll develop a fistula. And for those of you who don't know, a fistula is a tear between a woman's vagina and either a rectum or a urethra. And the consequences are really pretty devastating. She'll just be leaking urine or feces uncontrollably. And unless it's treated surgically, she'll be ostracized, and her life will be a nightmare. And there's about 1 million young girls, as far as I know, that have untreated fistulas, even though the fistula surgery is, I think, about $50 to $100 and could easily be repaired. And this was in Malawi. This is Margarito, and she's had her surgery, or is waiting for her surgery, and she was 15 years old. She had an obstructed delivery. Her baby died, but at least she was fortunate enough to get to this clinic and get a repair. Now, it turns out that that females are really the face of AIDS. They're much more susceptible to getting AIDS than males. And this was Anna, and she was mentioned in the introduction. And this was in Tanzania. And again, just to repeat, she was just terrified of telling her husband that she had AIDS, because she would be just thrown out of her home, have no shelter, no food, even though he's the one who gave it to her. She was even terrified to be seen with a film crew. We had to go into a small little room so her neighbors wouldn't even see her. And this was taken in Kenya. That's Ruth and her daughter Jane. And this was in one of the slums in Nairobi. And they both have AIDS. But fortunately, they're being treated with antivirals. And or they have no symptoms. Now, there's a big chapter in the book where I give homage to all the healthcare workers, because to me they're the silent heroes of the book. They just work relentlessly and for very, very little pay. They go to all these rural communities. They're really on the front line of giving maternal and reproductive health care. This was in Otavalo, Ecuador. Now, there's a big section on the book on contraception and family planning. And let me explain this photograph to you. It's very special. It's really the only thing I've ever documented that really demonstrated actual cultural change. This was in northern Nigeria. And this was an evangelical Christian church. And they really had this very strong beliefs that contraception and family planning was taboo. But there was an amazing Planned Parenthood officer that worked with them with the unlikely name of, thank God, Okason. And he worked with them for years. And he got them to change their policies. And here they are, there's a congregation in the background, and they have all these different contraceptives that they're handing out, and they've really adopted these practices, which is pretty amazing. And they're very serious about it, because even when you go to a hairdresser, they'll hand out a condom just in case you need one. There's a chapter in the book on peer sexual education, and I don't know about you, but I haven't seen many scenes like this in the United States. And it's a very successful program. This is in Cusco, Peru, and that's Ophelia. And she's in front of her parents' boarding house, and she's just basically handing out a contraceptive to a student who's boarding at the house and explaining its safe usage. So anyway, the next part of the book, it really is the most emotionally difficult part. And it's all about violence against women. And even though a lot of these photographs were taken in India, the violence against women really is pervasive. It's all over the world. And this is Kala, and she's the cover of Faces of Courage. And she's a child bride. This was in Rajasthan, India. And she was married when she was 3 months old, which is hard to believe. I sometimes have to repeat that. And the deed was signed, and she's still living at home with her parents. But as soon as she's old enough to have a child, which will be shortly, she was about maybe 13 when I took these photos, she's going to be shipped off to her husband's home. And while I was photographing Kala, her neighbor Mooney walked in. And it turned out that Mooney was married when she was 15, but when she was 16, her husband died. And then she explained to me that now she's a widow for life, which I also found rather stunning and shocking. And she's considered bad luck, and in her culture, nobody will marry her now. This is a section on dowry abuse, and this is Nausea. And again, she's here in Delhi, and she's telling her story, how her husband tried to kill her not once but twice because the dowry wasn't sufficient. And dowries, even though the British outlawed it when they were still in charge of India, it's still very, very widely practiced, more than ever. And dowry is just basically a continual system of ongoing blackmail. And the husband who wanted a car instead of the motorcycle, and it wasn't sufficient, so he pushed her off the motorcycle while she was pregnant. And she lost a baby, and he went to get her in the hospital, and he tried to poison her again. And the only support she really has is going to this women's group, and she's trying to really get permission to really get divorce. I took this portrait of her after she was talking to the group, and you can see how tense she is just from the gesture in her hands, and she immediately broke into tears afterwards. And it took a lot of courage for her even to come to this group to present her case. This is Rahna, and this was in Lucknow, India, and she had a baby, and while she was in so there were some complications, so she had to stay in the hospital a bit longer. And when she came home, her husband and her in-laws told her it really wasn't her baby, and they beat her and threw her in a closet and tried to really beat her badly, and she had to escape. And the husband basically was using her to get a baby, even because the woman that he wanted to have a baby with couldn't have a baby. So, I mean, again, I got most of these stories through NGOs, and a lot of them were supported by a Global Fund for Women. And this was another case. This is Mira, and this was in Lucknow, and she was found wandering the streets just sobbing and crying. And she went to the police originally, and the police asked her, what's the problem? And she said, well, her mother's a sex worker, and her mother was beating her because she wanted her to go into the business and drop out of school, and she didn't want to. And the police said to her, well, you should just be a good girl and listen to your mother, and we'll even be your clients. And anyway, it was only through the intervention of an NGO that she was able to get back to school, and she's living now with her aunt and uncle, who are her guardians right now. But in the book, there's other stories of women who have had similar experiences with the police. And I even recorded one story of a woman who was married to a police officer. And, she had no recourse with the legal system at all. There's a chapter in the book on trafficking, and this is Sani, and she's this was taken in Indonesia. And Indonesia traffics 6 million women, ostensibly as domestic servants. And she was held in Saudi Arabia for 3 years without being able to communicate with her family. And again, it was only an NGO that was able to gain her freedom and have her reunited with her family. And you see them in the background. And while I was interviewing her, I just couldn't imagine what it was like for them to be separated for 3 years, not knowing at all if she was alive, or it's terrible. And unfortunately, it's not a very uncommon story. So we're going to switch gears now. I'm going to try and tell you about some of the more positive aspects. And this is a big chapter on economic empowerment and rehabilitation. And this is Jolie, and this was in Nairobi, Kenya. And this was a program called Hashima Kenya, and it was sponsored by American Jewish World Service. And Hashima Kenya basically takes young girls from war-torn countries in Central and Eastern Africa, and almost all of them have been subject to physical and sexual violence, and they rehabilitate them. And Jolie's become a very successful textile artist. She's able to support herself. She has a new community. And I'm not going to go into her whole story. I didn't get her story until about 2 months after I photographed her. But when I read her story, in my mind, she was like one of the greatest examples of human resilience I've ever read about. I mean, she was originally from Rwanda, and just horrible, horrible things happened to her. And I actually chose to photograph her because she had so much joy in life. And I just couldn't imagine this was really the same person who had endured so much tragedy. This is Reuter. She was a former fistula patient, and this was in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and it's another program that's used to rehabilitate women, and she's a textile artist. I have a big section in the book on microfinance, and this was in Ghana. And this is Sarah, who was a very, very successful entrepreneur. And she took a small loan of $50 and was able to take more loans and grow a very successful bakery business where she bakes 3,000 loaves of bread a week, and she employs many people, and she's able to send her children to school and she's making sure they get a full education. This was in Gujarat, India. This is Kuravan. And it's sort of an example of how maybe traditional education doesn't work for all people, but there are other methods of really empowering women. And Kuravan is very tribal, as you can see. And it turns out a lot of these tribes in the Kutch region of Gujarat have tremendous textile skills. And a woman, Judy, came over there and started an NGO, and she taught these women marketing skills and design skills. So instead of just doing rote trite work for tourists, they actually can do very high-end creative work, and they can sell their work in high-end boutiques in Mumbai and Delhi, and even export them to Europe. And it was wonderful to see the work they're doing. They're very excited to be doing the work. They make a good livelihood. And so I think every solution has to be addressed to the population that you're trying to improve. It's not one shoe fits all. Now, the biggest section of the book is on girls' education. And really, nothing gives me more hope and optimism than when I walk into a classroom of girls and I see feel their enthusiasm, and just their intensity to learn is just really palpable. And I'm just going to go through a few examples. This is a program in India, again in Rajasthan. And in Rajasthan, the illiteracy rate of girls is particularly high. And it's also, they have very high child marriage rates. And Educate Girls India, they're really trying to get girls educated and keep them from getting married as young brides. And this is Priya, and she was the very first young girl I photographed there. And unfortunately, she really had to stay home and take care of the goats and her younger siblings. But her neighbor, Nishi, is with her mother, and her mother had a chance when she was younger to travel outside of her village. And she realized that she would have a completely different life had she been educated. And she is ensuring that her daughter is really getting a full education now. And this is Payel, and she's 13 years old, and maybe 6th or 7th grade, and she's not a child bride, and she's in school. There's many, many more photographs of this program in the book. Now, the microfinance program in Ghana also has a girls' education project, and they give scholarships to 100 of the best and brightest girls in their community. This was in northern Nigeria, and this was a program, I think, run by the Bixby School out of UCSF. And these photographs were taken in a small little mud hut. It was raining, it was muddy when we got there. They had to sweep out the water and put down a mat. And a teacher basically comes once a week, and they have a little book, and all these girls just take turns reading from this one book. And you know, they just follow every word, every sentence that each one of them is saying. Now, I thought they were really engaged until the teacher brought out a computer. And I've never seen more fascination, more focused attention than anywhere. And to me, it's really a great example of how potential is everywhere, but opportunity is lacking in most places. This is Lynette and Sharon, and they're Maasai Girls, and this was in southern Kenya. And this was another girls' education project. And it turns out that Maasai girls are also forced to marry when they're very, very young, and even undergo the barbaric tradition of female genital mutilation. And American Jewish World Service is trying to educate these young Maasai girls, and I really believe it's having an effect in changing the culture. There's a section in the book on young women who have grown up in very, very difficult circumstances and have, through the help of NGOs and foundations, have made successful careers for themselves. And this is for Rita, and she's an English teacher in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And she's here with part of her class. Her class had about 150 students. They could hardly walk around and move around in it. Now, I end the book with another series of portraits, and that's of young girls. And I really like the statement of purpose of the United Nations Population Fund. And that's every pregnancy should be wanted, and every childbirth safe, and every young person's potential, especially those of young girls, should be fulfilled. Now, you look at these young girls, and they're full of joy, and they have absolutely no idea of the dangers that await them. They're really, literally on the edge. They're on the edge of getting an education, be able to make choices for themselves. Or are they going to face some of these horrible things that I mentioned earlier, teenage pregnancy and fistula and physical and sexual violence? It's really up to us to really make sure that they have a life that's really full of potential. And many people have told me that Faces of Courage is a very, very timely book. And my response to them is that, unfortunately, I feel it's going to be timely for far too long into the foreseeable future. And I really published Faces of Courage to raise consciousness and bring this issue to the world's attention. And it's really my hope to really get this book into high school and college libraries, really to educate and create a whole new set of activists. Because I really feel young people are very visually oriented, and they respond to compelling images. They're great at social media, and I believe they'll be a great energy source to spread the word that the rights of women and girls should be ensured every place on earth. So, thank you. So I guess we can take some questions now.
Thank you so much. It's really touching to see all those pictures, and honestly, I get very heavy-hearted and overwhelmed. And I'm wondering if you have any specific advice over how we can make a difference, because the problem feels too big.
I think that's the most common question I really get asked. And it is a big problem, and the only way to really address it is really on a personal level. So everyone has a different set of talents. I happen to be a photographer, so I've approached it that way. But there are people who are great fundraisers, great communicators. There are people who may have the ambition to start their own NGO. In the back of the book, there are all the NGOs that I know of, that I've worked for, that I've collaborated with, and you can get involved with any one of them, and they'd probably be able to volunteer to get started. But it is a big problem, and it requires a lot of people really getting involved. And it's hard, right? It's hard to really get attention on this matter. I mean, just look what's happening in the world right now. And, everything is about all the terrorists, and rightfully so. But, there's really a correlation, because it turns out that all these places where you have all these religious fanatics, they're the places that treat women the absolute worst. So it's very important to empower women to also, as a way of combating terrorism too.
I'd like to ask perhaps some more technical questions about the photography side.
Sure.
Seems like obviously you make a good connection with the gals because of the smiles and the genuine portrayals. Could you talk about that process, language barriers, how do you approach it, how does it work out?
That's also the second most asked question. But, years ago, I was with my son, he's an anthropologist, and I was photographing with him in Peru. And he said, "Dad, how do you get these pictures? You're not communicating with these people, So I really had to think about that. I really had to reflect. I really couldn't answer right away. And, what I came up with, I think it's just the energy that I have when I'm photographing anyone, especially like some of these women and girls. Well, first of all, it took 10 years to do the project. And one of the reasons it took so long was that I always had to collaborate with an NGO or foundation. I just couldn't get on an airplane and just go off by myself, because I really needed to be accepted into the communities. And the way to do it is to go with people that, well, first of all, I want to record the work of the NGOs and foundations, but I also wanted to gain the trust of the people that I'm photographing. So just coming in with people that they know and that they've developed a relationship with, that really helps. So some of that trust must get transferred to me. But I also think it's my attitude. Like a lot of people, I teach photography, and lots of times people who are not used to photographing people are kind of nervous and tense. They don't want to bother the people. They want to get as quickly as they can. Well, people are picking up your energy. So I have I go in with the attitude that I'm going to do something special. We're going to take our time, if possible, and that you're important to me, and we're going to try and create something that tells your story in a really classic, beautiful way. So I think people just pick up my energy, that I'm really serious and intent, and I think I'm fairly calm when I'm doing this, and that I care.
What are the time frames
Boy,
to spend
I have
time
to
with
actually work really fast. Sometimes I have some time, but lots of times I have to work very, very fast. And, I just have a lot of experience, so I know how to do it. But, I always like to have more time, but it's usually with an NGO and they have an itinerary, and we have to just move from place to place.
Hi there, thank you for speaking today and sharing with us all of these beautiful images that you've really used to capture so much more than, just the photograph that we can see. So I'm wondering how you capturing all of these women and children has changed your idea of what photography is capable of.
I've always felt that photography can be used to really raise consciousness and promote social justice. And, just getting back to my experience growing up on the Lower East Side, I changed careers to become a photographer. And when I did, I don't know if you know the work of like Lewis Hines and Jacob Rees. They documented I was very attracted to them because they were documenting all the life of all the immigrants on the Lower East Side. And I mean, there are many photographers whose work does make an impact. I think the trouble right now is that there's almost like a overabundance of media, and like good stuff, it's easy for very, very good stuff to get lost. And I really think that's a real problem. I think we're just over bombarded by too much media. And I think it's a really big question about like, how do you break through? I'd love for the book to get much wider distribution and people become much more aware of it. But I mean, maybe that's where you guys can help with all your social media skills. But I do think, you know, photographs do make a difference, and they make a difference when they're very personal. Well, it was like a month, 6 weeks ago, I forget. There was a photograph of a little Syrian boy who died off the coast of Turkey. And all of a sudden, when that photograph was published, there was just a great uproar about the rights of the refugees. And I really think that it was such an effective photograph because it had a very personal element in it. You know, when people see a lot of images of like masses of people and everything, we throw up our hands. We don't know what to do. It's like too much. But in my work, and I think that what that photographer did, I mean, he tried to make it really personal. So you have a sense of empathy and compassion and can relate to the people that you're seeing. So I think good photography will do that.
Thank you again. So this is actually very close to me. I grew up in Rajasthan in an all-girls boarding school, and I know girls wouldn't come back from summer vacation, and the reasons I heard was because they were married. So I relate to a lot of this. My own wedding was called off 2 months before the first time I was supposed to get married because of dowry demand. So I relate to all this very closely. I've actually taken the next summer off. I now have a 12-year-old daughter, and to basically show her how privileged she is and to help to go back to India and spend the summer actually working with these NGOs. I'm having a hard time finding the right place to go to because, you know, maybe it's easier for you because you have a name, but for me, like, how do I begin? How do I find a safe
I could
place?
help you.
Okay.
I'll give you the names of some contacts in India.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll be glad to help you, especially ones that work in Rajasthan.
Yeah.
This Educate Girls India, I'll just put you in touch with them.
Okay.